4 picks. Don't take them just as a parlay. Take them individually. You could match them against your own. And if you feel confident and it matches what you believe, go ahead and do it. Anyway, let's start off with, I typically don't take games on Friday because I've said it more than once. Teams or football players are creatures of habit. And when you're a creature of habit, that means you get used to playing at one time. Football players in college play on Saturdays most of the time. When you're not playing on Saturday, that's when things typically happen. And in college football, there's been history where things happen when the games aren't on Saturday. And I think it's due to that creature of habit credo. And just last week, Virginia Tech, a 19.5-point underdog, 18.5-point underdog, scaring the hell out of Miami down in Miami. Controversial win for Miami, but they just got out over the skin of their butt, teeth, whatever you want to say. Go back even further than that. Years ago, Florida State, a very good team, taking on Louisville, and we saw Dave Ragone made people think he was legitimately an NFL quarterback, beating Florida State. Charlie Strong, the coach of that team, with over 30 Florida football players on his team, Florida high school football players. Anyway, creatures of habit. So with that being said, I'm still going to take a game on Friday because I just see too much evidence to the contrary, and it may just work in my benefit. So UNLV is giving 6.5 points to Syracuse. I'm going with UNLV, the now 4-0 UNLV, who were 3-0 before, obviously, for the first time since 1984. Now they're 4-0. They got rid of their quarterback, or not got rid of him. He left, Matt Sluka from Holy Cross, as if someone missed him. Now Haj Malik Williams is the quarterback from the Campbell University Fighting Camels, steps in, picks up, scores 49 points offensively last week. Boom. Syracuse coming from the Carrier Dome over to the West Coast. There's going to be a problem right there because I don't think Kyle McCord is actually that good. He's decent. He may be even good, but that good? No. He gets more props because he's tied into what he did at Ohio State. And the reason, in my opinion, he ended up at Ohio State is because he was a package deal with Marvin Harrison Jr. They were high school teammates. And you know high schools, you know college, sometimes those package deals work out. Those two ended up going to the same school. Not a coincidence. Once Marvin Harrison went to the NFL, then Kyle McCord left. Primarily because Ryan Day said he was not going to give him the job unequivocally during the spring. He would have to battle Devin Brown for the quarterback spot. As it turned out, they both might have lost because now Will Howard is there from Kansas State. So I'm taking UNLV minus 6.5, giving the 6.5 to Syracuse. Second team up. South Carolina at home plus 9.5 Ole Miss. Ole Miss coming off that loss at home to Kentucky. No shame in the game. Kentucky played a defensive game because they are an ugly defensive team. We saw that against Georgia in Lexington. 1-point game, close game. But anyways, I'm taking South Carolina at home where no one pretty much thinks they're going to win, but they're playing a little Beamer ball now. I think they got enough on the defensive side, not a whole lot on the offensive side, but I think this is that time of year where Lane Kiffin's team, Ole Miss, starts doing things the wrong way and starts getting those back-to-back losses. This starts that back-to-back loss. Now, my third game, and I call this my first ever tribute game. I'm giving it a tribute to the late John Amos / James Evans. You know why? Because he always reached for his damn belt and he was ready to beat somebody's ass. And because of that, Boise State, 26.5, giving it to Utah State. If I ever saw a game where somebody needed to get that James Evans beating, this is the game. You can't have as bad a defense against the run as Utah State. And then you can take on Boise State in Boise when they have Ashton Jeanty, the number 1 running back in the country, the number 1 running back going into the NFL draft, who is still averaging over 10 yards a carry. Boo-hoo. Give me the 26.5 all day. Boise State wins that game. And finally, surprise, surprise, my last game, Rutgers versus Nebraska. I'm actually going with Rutgers plus 7. The reason why, Nebraska is favored by 7. It doesn't mean they're going to lose. Nebraska is favored by 7.
I didn't know that.
I don't think Nebraska is going to necessarily lose, but with that 7-point line, it comes with just staying within those 7 points. Nebraska is at home. Nebraska is a different team now than they were last year, but there are so many different storylines in this game. Nebraska comes back with a very good defense. Tony White is the defensive coordinator for Nebraska. He was there now 2 years there, last year, this season, before that, in Syracuse with Dino Babers. Defensively, that defense gets after you. That 3-3-5 they run, they get after the quarterback. They had 6 sacks against Shedeur Sanders in Colorado. Last week against Purdue, 5 more sacks. Even the game they lost against Illinois, they had 2 sacks, so they still get after the quarterback. The caveat here, however, is that when there's a team that can run the ball, whether it's a big back or just consistently running, which is a rugged team like Rutgers and what they can do, they have their issues because they can't pin their ears back and go after the quarterback. And we saw that against Illinois when they had their big running backs. You had 2 big running backs there, and you had a 250-pound running back, a 235-pound running back. They pounded it over 160 yards rushing against them. They couldn't get to the quarterback like they wanted to, and that's why they lost. Rutgers can, with running back Sammy Brown, and you have Kyle Managai, who I've spoken about before, certainly someone who could run the ball. Their quarterback isn't very good, but he does have some experience. Against Nebraska, Ethan Kaliakmanis is the same quarterback from Minnesota who's now with Rutgers, who played against Nebraska last year. Different team, kind of sort of on the defensive side, the same players. The only real difference with Nebraska this year is Dylan Raiola and the offense playing well because they have a legitimate quarterback back there. That defense, a year older, playing with Tony White's defense, his scheme, certainly going to be something to look at, but that road grading offense that Rutgers has, they don't get after the quarterback either. But that offensive line is enough to dominate even on the road. Nebraska may still win, but I think it may be a close game. NIL and transfer portal makes this game closer. Nebraska 5-0 against Rutgers in their lifetime, but we can't even look at long-time stats like that anymore because NIL and transfer portal rules makes things good and overnight practically. Greg Schiano, second time around with Rutgers, I think he'll be able to do that, keeping his team at least engaged. The last time they met, Nebraska won 14-13. The time before that, 21-28. Nebraska won again. But if you look at the time period in which it's happened, NIL started in 2021. The transfer portal started in 2018. Players weren't going to places like Rutgers. They were kind of trickling to places like Nebraska, a name, but they weren't going to Rutgers. And Rutgers now getting those kinds of players, but having their homegrown Kyle Managai, I think enough to be consistent and keep it close enough. 7 points, I think, is good. Made a short story long, but that's what it is.